I'm like, dude, I summon demons from a Ouija board. Do you think I'm scared of some little punk ass?
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 248. I've gotten a few requests over the years to do an episode about Twice. As far as that happening, I don't know, maybe someday. I don't know if it would fit the program that well. But as a bit of an extension of an olive branch, a consolation prize, I did find one idol group that would fit this program very well. And that's what we're going to be covering this week. It's Necronomidol.
정적이어가지고.
Was there something funny about that?
아니 촬영 같은 거 하다 보면은
My doll? Really?
I suppose you think that was terribly clever.
Whatever, Necronoma Preparation H. They're a pretty good fit for this show, but even then, talking about the idol stuff is a little bit tricky. Listen, I get metal, alright? I pretty much understood metal as soon as I watched Power Rangers Heard. When I was like 5, okay? That made sense to me. The idol stuff I've been into for a comparatively shorter amount of time. And it's a very different world and it's very complicated. I mean, take one of the easier to understand idol groups like Twice. So, their whole story starts way back in the 90s. A guy named Jin Young Park recently graduated with a degree in geology and decided to try his hand in being a pop singer. And then ended up working out pretty well after a couple false starts. And as he got more into the business, he started up his own record label. And then one day, he's just like,
I got a plan, John.
You always got a plan.
박진영.
So he goes out and recruits the talents of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 girls of various exciting shapes and colors. It's very Pokemon. It has them do some dance routines and sing some songs.
Of course we sing, we're a gang!
Written initially almost entirely by JYP himself later on, with a songwriting team made up mostly of Nordic persons, Middle Easterners, and Mediterranean types. And then even later on in their career, you still got that same group of people writing lots of songs, but you also have individual members of the idol group like Chaeyoung, Nayeon, and the Best Girl writing some of the songs themselves. That's basically what's going on in Twice. And that might seem pretty darn complicated, but that's actually abnormally simple for a standard K-pop group. I mean, Twice has been the same 9 broads for the past 6 years. That's almost unheard of. And that ain't nothing compared to J-pop, where you got groups like Keyakizaka 46, who despite their name have actually had 59 different members coming in and out of the idol troupe. Alright, it's wild. I don't know how you're supposed to keep track of all these people. And even in the case of the musical act we'll be covering this week, Necronomidol, who are much more of an underground phenomenon, they've still had like 23 members in and out of the band.
That's a lot of names.
Plus, who knows how many different songwriters penning different musical parts for them to perform. It's almost more like the way an orchestra's set up. But even more than that, this is a musical act driven by a concept, which is true to some extent for nearly all K-pop and J-pop acts. But in the case of Necronomidol, it's a pretty weird and morbid concept. You can tell just from looking at their name, it's derived from
Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the book of the dead.
Or rather just, the regular old Necronomicon, the H.P. Lovecraft thing. You can see it in their song titles. They got a whole bunch of Lovecraftian words in there. Sarnath, Relia, Keliphi, Abhoth, Azathoth. And you can definitely see it in their cover art, particularly on their first and third full lengths, which have some really creepy looking covers. Initially, I actually thought they were drawn by Junji Ito, just by looking at some of the weird detail on the eyes and the strands of hair. But it turns out they went even crazier than that, because they got Suehiro Maruo, the man behind one of the most infamous of gory animes, Shoujo Tsubaki, to draw them. But more than anything, you can tell that this band is going to have a weirder concept because it's specifically playing to a whole lot of extreme metal aesthetics.
I know what you're thinking.
Jub, we already got baby metal. Why are you talking about this garbage? And yes, there are other metal affiliated, metal adjacent idol groups out there. But what separates Necronomidol from something like baby metal, which is clearly being played as sort of a joke, oh, it's metal, but it's kind of cutesy or whatever. Necronomidol is taking this shit way more seriously. They don't really go for cutesy at all. The closest thing they did to that was maybe back in their very early days when they did do the whole, anime girl running with the toast in her mouth gag in the middle of a video. But even then, they're holding up knives, they're dressed up like ghosts coming out of a Shinto shrine. It's less cutesiness subverting metal expectations and more metal aesthetics subverting cutesy expectations, if that makes sense. And even then, they didn't really run with that part of the concept for very long. You can particularly see the morbidity going on in two of the most notable members, that being Sari and Himari. Sari is kind of like the really spooky one with the green bob haircut and the spider crawling up her face. She's usually holding some sort of bladed implement, and she kind of has a really like gothic neoclassical affectation to her. Himari is the more intimidating member of the group. She's taller than average, she has more of a threatening presence, and she's easily the most black metal member of the bunch. And speaking of black metal, now that we've gone through a basic primer on their aesthetics that set them apart from your average J-pop girl group, we can get into the music proper, of which on every album they usually provide 3 different varieties, 3 different song forms that are adhered to. The first of which is black metal, or specifically black gaze. If you don't know what black gaze is, so sometime in the early 2000s, somebody was listening to some black metal, went something like and thought, hey, doesn't that sound a lot like that shoegaze stuff from the early 90s? Went like, and they decided to combine the two, and voila, you have black gaze, which mostly just kind of sucks. I mean, I like black metal and I like shoegaze. Black gaze, not so much. But honestly, Necronomidol, they're pretty good at it. Possibly because as a group of 4 or occasionally 5 of them slightly built Asian women, they possess notably more testosterone than your average black gaze band. One of their most notable black gaze experimentations, entitled End of Days, starts out with a very powerful declarative riff set, I guess you could say. Very Agalloch way to start a song. Melancholic tremolo pick guitars and then big heavy rhythm guitar hits, kind of like a timpani in an orchestra. Then once we get into the song proper, they kind of show off their dance music priors with a surprising amount of guitar chugging for what's ostensibly a black gaze song. Very rhythmic. And it contrasts very interestingly with when they actually go back into the proper black gaze with these big hanging guitar chords, the layered vocals getting a little bit more angelic sounding. And then they bring the chugs back in to have something for those very shimmery, ethereal guitar chords to bounce off of. The vocals are very well thought out here too. They're essentially acting like a third guitar line, playing very long sustained notes. So you got all these different intertwining melodies, and the whole song is building up to a very sort of epic collapse, playing much more into the whole gaze component of the black gaze conjunction before doing the whole phoenix rising out of the ashes thing as the black metal comes back in. It's still very poppy, but it's structured more like a black metal song than a pop song. It's a little bit more amorphous, which is fitting since the lyrics are all about the fungi from Yuggoth, you know, H.P. Lovecraft's collection of poetry. And the music video is them dancing around in gas masks at a cult compound. The second style of song that you see cropping up in their work quite a bit is something that is typically more expected of a metal adjacent idol group, and that is the dark power metal song. And this is probably where their material is the most Japanese sounding. Japan's always been really good at this particular style of music as a country, you know, ex-Japan and whatnot. But the rhythm guitar in a lot of these is pretty interesting because it's very melodic death metal adjacent with all of the chugging riffs. Like if this didn't have the female vocals over it, it was just instrumental, you might be able to trick somebody into thinking this is an old In Flames song or an Amon Amarth song even. At least during the heavier verse riffs like this one. But then when it builds up to the chorus sections of the song, it gets way more standard modern progressive power metal type stuff, with the guitars taking a back seat to the very proggy keyboards and the ascending vocal figures. It's very Galnerius sounding. Triumphant sounding stuff, which is a disconcerting considering the morbid subject matter. Definitely befitting of their concept as a group. Then the heavier rhythm guitars come back in, it goes back to a more of a mellow death thing. So they got plenty of black gaze songs, plenty of these sort of dark power metal songs, but my actual favorite song form that they utilize might be the least metal one, but also the one that kind of shows off their talents as an idol group the most in terms of vocal arrangement, and that would be their take on synthwave, best demonstrated illustrated by the song Skulls in the Stars, which is named after a Robert E. Howard story and is pretty much their...
You know, same thing as like...
It's their big hit single. It starts out with this really big, powerful, catchy melody that you know when it comes back later in the song, that's gonna be the fucking chorus. It's got a nice, big, heavy backbeat.
Like a big ass cigar sour.
You know it's a high-quality gym track. I've listened to it pretty much every day I've been to the gym this week. And where it starts to get really interesting is when they get into the verses and they start doing a whole lot of interesting back and forth between different vocalists who all have very different styles. That sort of back and forth is actually what initially got me into Twice as a musical act. And then they come together for some more layered stuff before eventually splitting apart again. Tying it all back together during that big chorus, which fucks hard, alright? If you hate this part, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if you're cut out for the whole music thing, because this is dank as fuck.
Bitches.
The bridge section, a lot of their synthwave songs, kind of brings back that sort of layered composition from their black gaze stuff, gradually adding in new tones, new layers of percussion, new vocal lines, which are often a fairly clever counterpoint variation to the chorus. They're definitely pop songs, but they are very well constructed pop songs. I mean, check out this big vocal explosion here. Okay, that's some good fucking stuff. And it might seem a bit odd to have albums that immediately juxtapose black metal songs, power metal songs, and synthwave songs.
But that's where you're wrong.
Because they are working in a very specific strain of synthwave that has always been heavily connected to black metal. That being synthwave in the style of Perturbator, who has always been my particular favorite synthwave artist. And I know a lot of people out there are like, oh god, that's so mainstream. Why don't you listen to real synthwave like Laserhawk or Zurius?
Can you, like, shut up?
Perturbator was one of the first to do the whole synthwave thing, and I think he's always done it the best. But the main guy behind Perturbator, James Kent, started out as a black metal guitarist, and most of Perturbator's initial fan base that weren't die-hard John Carpenter enthusiasts were black metal people. I covered Perturbator in depth about 3.5 years ago on episode 66, but for a brief refresher, Perturbator is really heavy with the whole dystopian cyberpunk vibe, heavily influenced by Philip K. Dick novels as well as a lot of 80s anime, and he tends to reuse a lot of the same synth patches over and over to sort of give himself a signature sound, and overall it just feels very heavy. It has a much more metal feel to it than a lot of the more new wave minded acts, and I'm almost positive Perturbator was a massive influence on Necronomidol, particularly on their earlier synthwave tracks, because check this out. The song Vulture on their first album starts out with this very Perturbator sounding, repeating cyclic sort of anti-melody. And then when the really heavy keyboards kick in, that's like total Perturbator worship. So where like if you assumed that one power metal song we listened to was actually an Amon Amarth song, if there wasn't any vocals on it, you could tell somebody this was Perturbator if it was an instrumental version, they'd believe you. But fret not, the vocals are there. And they're doing all those cool layered idol style back and forths that I love so much. And they fit really well with the building tense atmosphere of a song like this. Here comes another real big explosive hit. I don't know, I just really dig the very like complex vocal arrangements on a lot of this pop idol stuff coming out of Asia, and coupled with the darker overall atmosphere and like the Lovecraftian aesthetics, Necronomidol do a real good job with it. Now those song forms aren't exactly like hard and fast, like every song fits to one of those three. A lot of songs actually straddle multiple forms at once, and they also dip their toes into other forms of like weird black metal stuff occasionally. Specifically on their last full-length album, they tried their hand at sort of a black and roll thing. Now if you don't know what black and roll is, here's a high-quality Norwegian example. The band Cold with their song Død off their third album Mørke Gravers Kommer. It's essentially very groove-focused black metal, simple drum beats, usually surprisingly loud bass guitar, and generally a tendency towards mid-paced tempos. Earlier I mentioned how Necronomidol will often blend together the different song forms, like doing some black metal stuff in the middle of a synthwave song, or doing some synthwave stuff in the middle of a power metal song. Yeah, like that. And the song Ritual off of the wonderfully Scandinavianly titled Vamjelseriter, which means Rites of Disgust. They mix sort of like a heavy grinding dance music style with black and roll stuff. Like this opening bit right here sounds like a collection of riffs could have come off of a Sarke album, but you can hear a little bit of that heavy synth presence bubbling under the surface. During Hamari's verse, the guitars entirely fall away, and she's left doing this really spooky gothic crooning thing over that bubbling bed of synths before the pre-chorus section hits and those black and roll guitars and heavy drum beats come back in. The vocals get more intense and layered. Really interesting blend of spooky gothic dance music and black and roll stuff. And it's a genre meld that makes sense given the groove-oriented nature of both spooky dance music and spooky black and roll music. Now you might remember earlier I mentioned there's been a whole shitload of girls in and out of this group.
That's a lot of names.
That would sort of end up being their undoing because Necronomidol is currently on hiatus, with only one member still being active in the context of Necronomidol, that being Himari. But the good news is, Himari appears to have a whole lot of faith in this weird dark morbid concept, and she started a solo project called Isiliel, which essentially picks up where Necronomidol left off, albeit with an even darker and more intense aesthetic. Like there's a whole lot of weird spooky bondage shit, both of the Western variety with the chains and the leather and whatnot, as well as the Japanese variety with the shibari ropes. She's put out 2 singles so far, the first of which goes even harder on the black gaze stuff, essentially becoming very Scandinavian sounding atmospheric black metal, complete with lots of very pagan metal styled folk music interludes utilizing Jews, harps, hardanger fiddle, and hurdy-gurdies. But the meat of this music is based around blast beat heavy atmospheric black metal with very long riffs and a whole lot of Burzum style guitar layering. It's definitely the most Nordic sounding stuff she's done, and I like it quite a bit. There's also a lot of like Bathory style tribal drumming with the heavier, groovier, sort of expansive riffs. Very Falkenbach or Twilight of the Gods sounding. But when her vocals do kick in, they're surprisingly delicate sounding, a feeling which is enhanced by the fact that she's the only one singing. Left over from her more black gaze days is a sense of post-rock style revelatory songwriting where everything always kind of feels like it's unfolding into something new. But her other single, the one that came out first, lends even more into the gaze side of the black gaze spectrum in that she's going back to one of the bands that influenced a lot of that early shoegaze stuff, that being the Cocteau Twins. If you haven't heard, sound a little bit something like this. Jangly guitars, 80s drum machine, spooky female vocals, that kind of thing. But Isiliel's doing another genre fusion thing here where it's blending that with sort of like a harder edge dance music type thing. The song Survival Strategy starts out sounding, very standard Cocteau Twins jangly guitar stuff, but to that is added kind of like a weird slowed down breakbeat drum thing before the real heaviness kicks in. With this odd synthetic imitation of a fretless bass sound. It's still very laid back music, way more laid back than anything she ever did with Necronomidol, but I like it a lot. It's sort of an interesting little deconstruction of early 90s kind of dream pop music, as well as a little bit of city pop with those goofy disco horn parts. But of course, it's still Himari, and she's still a very spooky broad, so it's gonna do stuff like this little bit of noise-induced insanity. Before going back into that more dance pop take on Cocteau Twins style dream pop, really looking forward to hearing more of this project. Hopefully we get a full-length album someday, because she's a very talented singer and dancer with a very talented team of songwriters. And of course, it certainly helps that I find her very attractive. But there you go, that's an episode about Necronomidol. Hope you liked it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.